friends forever until the game-changing moment.
Alex, I love you!
What's happening here?
Come with me.
I'm sorry. I can't do this.
But when friends have been together this long, nothing can break them up.
Great news. We are back together. Here we go again.
Another double bloody.
You'll do whatever it takes to keep the good times rolling.
Let's go, ladies. It's time to blast our boots.
Best night ever.
A comedy about lovers
Did she say the sex was bad?
Every relationship.
and friends.
None of us has made a new friend in like 11 years.
Happy endings. Saturday night at 9 on Channel 96 ViuTV6.
Good evening, I'm Joel Flynn here in Hong Kong. Welcome to the late edition of ViuTV News. Coming up on tonight's show. Donald Trump's former campaign manager surrenders to authorities as the investigation intensifies into Russian meddling in last year's election. A new Chinese history syllabus sparks controversy with plans to leave out the Hong Kong riots and skip over Tiananmen's crackdown details. And housing authorities Stanley Wong slams Carrie Lam's projection on public housing stock as not scientific. Good evening. We start with breaking news this evening as the former campaign manager for US President Donald Trump has been told to surrender to authorities as part of the probe into alleged Russian meddling in last year's election. Paul Manafort has handed himself into the FBI field office in Washington in the last few hours. The charges against him and his business associate Rick Gates were not immediately clear, but they are the first from the Russia investigation. 68-year-old Manafort served with Trump's presidential campaign from June to August last year before resigning, amid reports he had received millions of US dollars in illegal payments from a pro-Russian political party in Ukraine. Tweeting on Sunday morning, the US president called it a witch hunt. He pointed fingers at Democratic rival Hillary Clinton, saying she should be investigated instead of the phony Trump-Russia collusion. He urged Republicans to do something before tweeting later. All of this Russia talk right now when the Republicans are making their big push for historic tax cuts and reform. Is this coincidental? Not. Well, Trump's Asia tour begins next week, and there's plenty of talk about how the region's leaders will deal with the unpredictable American president. In the Philippines, President Rodrigo Duterte said he plans on being polite and to listen to him at the ASEAN summit in Manila. Meeting the press and government officials in Davao City today, the firebrand leader said he will talk to Trump about terrorism, drugs and North Korea when they meet on the sidelines of the convention. Duterte is known for his anti-US tirades, though in July he publicly rejected an invitation to visit the White House, calling the US a lousy country.
I would deal with President Trump in the most righteous way. Welcome him as an important leader, as a matter of fact, the important leader on this side of the planet. And I would have to also listen to him, what he has to say. My responses would be calibrating of what he would ask me.
Turning to local news and the growing controversy over education, a new Chinese history syllabus for junior high school students is skipping out Hong Kong's leftist 1967 riots and skipping over details of the 1989 Tiananmen crackdown in Beijing. This as the government kicked off the second phase of consultation on the programme change. At a news conference, education officials explained it's not possible to include every incident in the past, but added it is up to the teachers to touch on topics they believe are important. They urged the public not to politicise the issue and said it is unfair to say teaching Chinese history is a way to brainwash students.
In existing textbooks, there's already a section on the PRC's internal politics and diplomacy that covers those issues. There will be room in the new curriculum for teachers to talk about them if they agree to it. But it's up to them to make the call. If they decide the issues are not important enough to be taught, that's their judgment.
Housing Authority's Stanley Wong has added his voice to the backlash against Chief Executive Carrie Lam's comments on public housing stock. He slammed Lam's estimation as not scientific and that it overestimated the demand for home ownership among public housing tenants. This after Lam told local media when the city reaches 800,000 public flats, most rental units built afterwards will be offered up for tenants to buy. Wong says that means 160,000 public flats to be built in the next 10 years will be up for sale to low-income families. He questions, though, if there is such great demand among the poor. On that note, more than 600 subsidised flats are set to be built under 2 housing society development projects. The cheapest flat would be sold at just under $2 million. As soon as 2020, this site in Shengquan-o will become a residential building housing 330 families. The 33-storey building will offer small to medium-sized units with the biggest around 680 square feet. Meantime, a 29-storey tower is planned for a site in Tunmun for 290 households. Other than public housing tenants, single people earning less than $26,000 a month can apply for the flats. For households with 2 or more members, that income ceiling is set at $52,000. The Communications Authority has issued a strong advice to local broadcaster TVB, urging it to pay more attention to the directions it listed in its free-to-air TV licence. The broadcaster kicked up a storm in July by replacing RTHK's satirical current affairs show Headliner with news footage of President Xi Jinping's visit to Hong Kong. Having received more than 400 complaints, the authority ruled that TVB's decision has constituted a breach of its licence. In response, TVB insisted Xi's speech was more important than the current affairs show. It criticised the authority for neglecting such special occasions. Meanwhile, uproar in the social service sector as over 20 projects serving more than 1,000 residents are about to be suspended. The NGO operating them, the Neighbourhood Advice Action Council, is laying off dozens of staff due to a miscalculation in its budget. NGO staff, along with lawmakers, have urged the government to step in with an emergency cash injection so that its programmes can continue. They have also slammed the NGO itself for being irresponsible, as the services cut will hit those who need them most. Its projects help the elderly, needy families, children and young people, many in the low-income area of Tungcheng.
The council receives up to $350 million of government funding each year. Its financial report also says that it has up to $100 million of reserves. It's being absolutely irresponsible to just abruptly cut ongoing services that are dedicated to vulnerable groups like socially marginalized youth and elderly with dementia.
Some good news for patients suffering from spinal muscular atrophy, commonly known as SMA. Health authorities are taking a step to try and bring in a new drug that treats the degenerative disease. The rare disease hit the headlines after Carrie Lam promised to secure the drug for sufferers in response to an open letter by an SMA patient. Writing on social media at the weekend, Lam vowed to monitor the process herself. There's no timeline yet, but Health Secretary Sophia Chan said today officials are in talks with an American drug company about the medicine.
They are going to exchange information on the safety, the efficacy, and also effectiveness of the drug. And further to this analysis of these information, the hospital authority will continue to work very closely with the pharmaceutical company to move forward with the drug provision.
OK, coming up next, the latest from the world of business. Well, let's kick things off with a look at what happened today on the markets. The Hang Seng Index of leading shares closed down 0.36%. Mainland worries about a slew of impending IPOs did feed into offshore trade, while investors are also concerned about tightening availability of cheap money. It was an interesting day for HSBC, meanwhile. The company posted profits that were up almost 500% compared to last year, but also reported rising costs. The growth in revenue was largely thanks to Hong Kong, according to its outgoing CEO, in particular because of higher rates of lending here, part of a wider pivot to its second home market of Asia. Profits for the third quarter at the bank were up 10% across the Asian region. Quarterly expenses, though, were also up 7% across the group as well, higher than analysts expected. That sent the shares 1% lower. Not such good news for policymakers and other businesses here in Hong Kong either. A new study out of China has ranked the city 12th in a global study of metropolitan competitiveness. Property prices are largely to blame for the low ranking in a yearly survey that put Hong Kong in 6th place just a few years ago. The report's author said the city could improve if it focused on more technology and innovation development. One of the surprising results was Shenzhen's soaring ranking up to 6th. The mainland city is currently on track to surpass the size of Hong Kong's economic output by next year. Now, in the age of ever-evolving smartphones, a major name in cameras is struggling to compete. Nikon is planning to shut down its factory in China's Jiangsu province, which makes entry-level digital cameras. About 2,500 jobs are likely to be impacted. The company is planning to outsource the work and says it's the only way to survive in a shrinking market. Nikon has about 30% of the share of China's camera market, which is getting smaller by the day. Japan is in the midst of a shopping frenzy, meanwhile, with retail sales at their strongest in months. Spending was up more than 2% in September as shoppers splurged on clothes and daily goods. Analysts say the result is a good sign that the Japanese are happy to open their wallets in an otherwise tight labour market. Now, as storm hit Puerto Rico continues to pick up the pieces, a row is escalating over the restoration of power there. The government's bankrupt power company is tearing up a repair contract because of major questions over its integrity. The $300 million deal with a tiny US company, Whitefish Energy, has come under fire after revelations it never went through a public bidding process. Utility bosses admit it isn't a good look. Take a listen to this.
PREPA has given away $300 million to a company without experience, or that the belief that there was some corruption act and then some other people may have gotten money, etc. If you read that and you have no light, no water, then that perception changes abruptly, to the extent that during the last four days they've been thrown stones at and bottles.
OK, time for a break now, but when we return, Kevin Spacey apologises for inappropriate